Hi, Chris here. So the time has come for a manned mission to the moon. So, got the command module set up. So obviously we start back to front, and we're going to start off with the re-entry module. So this is the bit that's going to come back into the planet. So we need a parachute. Also going to need a service bay, as well as a heat shield. Let me just checking through the engines, and I'm just thinking about what design we're going to need. So we're going to need a medium fuel tank, and then we're going to have a small engine, so you need a really light one. We're going to need some landing struts. The more you have, the more stable it is. Let's go with 3 of them. It's just the lightest possible route. Right, so we haven't added on the heat shield and stuff yet, nor the science. So we're going to want to add one of these. Now I'm adding it higher up, and the reason I'm doing that is I want the weight of the command module to be closer to the heat shield, so that the heat shield faces the direction of travel when we're doing re-entry. So you always want to be bottom heavy when you're doing re-entry, so it doesn't flip round. You don't want to flip round and see your nose flying into a fireball when you're doing re-entry, especially after a long mission like this one. Right, so we open it up and we can fit lots and lots of science in there. So let's see if we can just zoom in a little bit. You have to rotate things so it shows properly inside. We can't fit it on doors, which is a bit annoying. Let's just put it on the floor. Let's put it around the edge here. This early on, there aren't that many things that can go in here. Obviously later we'll have lots and lots more options, and this thing will become quite crowded. So later on you might want to run these as sub-assembly. So you could pack all your science in there, and then to save that service module with everything really tightly packed as a sub-assembly. Just click and load up sub-assembly, plonk it on the ship. Takes 2 seconds. So you don't have to do this whole thing every time. Early on though, when you're unlocking lots of technology, you're obviously going to want to change your contents for your service bay relatively frequently. A bit more. Put it there. There you go, it's all spread out. Let's close her up. What else do I need? I'm going to need to detach it. So I need a structural separator. We put the engine. This engine's going to do the landing stage and also the return all the way back to cabin. Okay, so we're going to need to separate that as well. And we're going to need a big engine. We're going to need big fuel tanks. I haven't unlocked the big fuel tanks yet, so I'm going to use lots and lots of little ones. The disadvantage of this is it makes it a little bit unstable. You get more unstable the taller your ship gets. Let's put a little engine on that. You just want to minimize the weight, that's why. Also, that little engine is relatively fuel efficient. You can tell fuel efficiency because it's got ISP measurement on it. I'm just going to adjust the position of these landing things. Try to get them a bit lower. Right. So the disadvantage of this little engine is it doesn't generate any electricity, so I may have a bit of power problem here. I haven't unlocked solar panels yet, so it could be a real issue. I'm just going to use lots of solid boosters to get me into space. So 3 there, and then I'm going to have another set of them below. These things are so cheap that it doesn't really matter. You can just slam them all on. Early on, certainly, with smaller rockets, it's just so much cheaper to use these solid boosters, especially the slightly bigger one, the S1s, which are the longest of these boosters. They just have huge amounts of thrust. They have a really long burn time, and they still only cost like 2,000. So it's a real bargain way of getting your ship into space. You can also right click on those and limit the throttle so that they burn for much longer. So if you've only got, say, a single probe on top of a rocket, you can set it to 50% throttle, and the solid booster will burn for twice as long, get you almost the entire way to orbit on just one booster. Right, so we've set this up. And we've got takeoff. We've got enough thrust. It's always good. So we've got 3 in the first stage. Then we've got the central engine of that, which is just going to sustain our speed so that we coast up into thinner atmosphere a bit higher up. Hopefully we'll get about 12,000 before we go to the next stage. Then we separate the bottom stage. We go to 1 engine again. So we just keep coasting. We probably get a little bit of acceleration there. Then we switch to 2 engines, and that's just going to boost us all the way here towards orbit. Then the final little bit's going to be in that liquid fuel stage. So that's the staging there. We've got separation. So we separated around 8,000 meters, a little bit low. Could need to go back and add a few more boosters. More boosters always good. Right, so I'm just burning the next 2. I'm trying to rotate, but I haven't got much control. So I'm getting a little bit of rotation now. So this is about as much as I can get. 20,000 meters. Still going a little bit slow. I'm not sure that little engine I've got on the next stage is going to be enough. Let's separate off again. So we've only got this tiny little engine here. I'm wondering if it's not going to have enough thrust to push us into orbit. At least not into orbit before we start dropping down to the planet. Ooh, lost control a bit there. Ooh. There we go. It's quite long and we haven't got that much control on it. The longer your rocket is, the more SAS you're going to need, and I've only got the stuff in the command module there, so it's not very stable. So Jebediah's SAS capabilities are being put to the test. So at the moment I'm only level 1, so I've got stability, and then prograde and retrograde. So the prograde is just going to lock onto our forward direction, and so we can like do a long thrust without having to adjust our direction. And the retrograde keeps us going in the backwards direction. The retrograde is useful if you're doing re-entry, obviously, because it points your heat shield straight on direction of travel. So I'm going to lock off the fuel tank. This is the return fuel tank I'm locking off. And what that's going to do is it's going to stop it getting drained while I'm trying to get into orbit. So let's see how we're doing. I'm quite worried about this. We're in space, but I don't think we're going to have enough thrust to get into orbit. At least not before we drop down to the planet. Right, so let's run things a little bit faster now. I'm using a little time acceleration. So seeing we're dropping altitude, so we're never going to make orbit there. So let's swap it for a bigger engine. This one's got considerably more thrust. It's heavier. It gives less thrust per unit of liquid fuel we're using. But we get that thrust happens a lot faster. So we're getting the boost in speed to get into orbit before we start dropping. So let's see how it goes. We head back to orbit. This bit's same as before. Getting the rotation. There we go. So we've got a lot more thrust this time. So I'm waiting for the apoapsis, so at least get closer to it. I could afford to do that because I've got so much more thrust. My manoeuvres can be a lot more concentrated into the ideal, most optimal position here. Right, so we've clearly got most of the way to orbit, and then the engine cuts out. Why? Because we run out of fuel. So we need to redesign again. So what do we do when we run out of fuel? Solution? Add much more fuel. This unfortunately is going to have big drawbacks, because it means we've got a much heavier object to get into orbit. It's not like before. Before we changed it by maybe 1 ton. This time it's going to be a huge change in the mass of the rocket. Okay, so I'm considering adding an extra stage. So I'm going to need the bigger engine again. Could also use these side engines, but no. It's very inefficient for me to do it that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add the fuel tanks to the same stage as before. So if I add an extra stage, I'd obviously have to carry 2 lots of engines up, and that's going to make it even heavier, even worse. So, but yeah, let's add another one as well. So we're getting a bit ridiculously long now. So, I think I'm lacking first stage thrust, aren't I? Also getting these engineering warnings, which are telling me that I haven't got a parachute attached to my command module. It'll pretty much always say that. It's not really a problem. Those things are more of a guide, they're not really telling you what you need. So I'm using slightly less thrusters this time. Just going to use 4 boosters altogether. So this will give me a lot more speed early on, but I'll have to use the upper stage for longer. Getting lots and lots of speed, getting some proper wind resistance there. Hopefully things won't burn up and break off. Alright, so second stage is underway. The advantage of this is that it gives me directional control from the main engine now. This heavier rocket has a slight direction, so you can bend the rocket to bend the nozzle on the engine so it can help you point in the right direction. So you can get round to the 45 degrees here. We get a more optimal entry direction into orbit. And this will save huge amounts of fuel, so it'll make it much easier. Okay, so we're heading up into space now. Make sure we get enough altitude. And getting great directional here. Right, so I've cut thrust because I'm going to go out of orbit into outer space now. So I'm over 70,000 meters. I'm going to wait for the apoapsis and then make my next burn. Here we go. So this should nice and quickly get us into orbit. Boom. Oh, a bit too far. It's a very ugly spaceship. So go set target on the moon. And I've got a fairly flat orbit here. So I'm going to make a maneuver to correct the plane. So this is going to move my plane up and down a little bit. Oh, it's only just off. You see, when that thing spins around is when you're on exactly the same plane as the moon. Up it down a bit, up it. That'll do. you're never going to get it precisely right. Technically, when it's rotated 90 degrees, it's perfectly on the same plane. But obviously, it takes like a minute amount of fuel to spin off that by miles. So as long as you're close, it'll be fine. So I'm just changing my direction, line up for the burn. Then I'm going to accelerate time and get around there. Oh, damn it. Alright, I can't go any faster than this. I'm too low. Slow it down. Make sure we're all lined up. There we go. So I'm just going to do very, very gentle burn. So it's like the minimum possible throttle, and it'll just change that plane. There we go. Right, so let's target the moon. So you want about 70 degrees away from it. There you go, and you get an intercept. A bit more. See, at this point you can very, very efficiently set a low periapsis. If the periapsis disappears and you get an interaction like that, it means you're colliding with the planet. Don't set a course that lets you collide with the planet. I'm just going to redo it a little bit further over here. It'll give me a better intercept for less fuel. There we go. So if you just take the first intercept possible, you're normally going to find out that you arrive a few million miles away from your target. So by just using a tiny bit of extra fuel and just nudging things while looking at that periapsis, you can, with virtually no fuel, adjust your altitude when you arrive at the planet. So let's go round. So I'm using warped maneuver here. Warped maneuver will stop you overrunning. In theory, at least. Sometimes it messes up. I don't know why, but sometimes the warp to maneuver thing leaves you accelerated. You don't really want that because you keep on accelerating past your maneuver. I've done it to the point where I've almost passed entirely out of the region of Joule, one of the outer planets, before I could slow down time accelerator. This is a bit of a nightmare. It takes forever to burn out there, especially if you're using like a little engine. So you spend an hour of your time getting this little spaceship all the way out there, and there's nothing you can do because your time accelerator messed up. You just got to hope and pray that you've got a good save game if that happens. Right, so the booster stage has just run out of fuel. Unfortunately, this means I'm going to have to use the lander stage for getting out to the moon. So let's unlock that fuel tank. So we've got a lot more acceleration now, because the rocket's so much lighter without all that big fuel tank with us. Even though we've got a much smaller engine. I'm quite worried we're going to run out of fuel. It does take quite a lot of fuel to land on the moon. So I'm looking at the periapsis, making those maneuvers. That's fairly good though. I'm just going to go to the Space Center. And what I'm going to do is check on contracts. Because sometimes after you take off, you get lots of new contracts available. And these give loads of extra money and loads of extra science. So you want to claim them while you're en route. Especially early on when you're doing things like your first moon mission. This is just going to double your income from the mission, more than pay for the entire mission price. Right, so I'm going to explore the moon. Well, I was going to do that anyway. So I've got 3 active missions I'm going to complete. It's going to give me loads of money. Now back to the tracking center and head back to my spaceship. Right, it's given me navigation coordinates for one of the missions there. It's just what that green little thing is. Doesn't matter. So back aboard the Apollo. It's a bit of an unoriginal name, isn't it? I should really sort that one out. Right, let's get around. So a big problem I'm going to have is electricity. I've got very little electric charge on this ship, and this engine I've got doesn't recharge electricity. Some of the bigger ones do generally, but this particular one doesn't, and many of the super light ones also don't generate electricity, which is a big problem. So I'm just going to do a course adjustment now. And what I'm trying to do is just try to get just as close as possible. So I'm just going to fiddle with this and try to do it very efficiently. So just changing my sideways direction a tiny bit. The further away you are from the destination, the much easier it is to get this kind of fine movement. But at the same time, even though you're using less fuel, you're losing quite a bit of precision. So this is the kind of distance you want. If you did it all the way from the opposite side of the orbit, you'd use a little bit less fuel, but you'd probably get it wrong. Just going to accelerate to the maneuver. See, this is using a tiny amount of fuel. Yes, so to be fuel efficient, you often want to do more burns, more efficient burns, rather than one big inefficient burn. Come on. So we're going to get very close. This is absolute minimum throttle I'm using. Okay, that'll do. See if I can find the moon. Where is it? My beautiful little spaceship. And there's Kerbin. Oh, there it is. It's quite big. I think it might be quite a lot smaller from this distance. Okay, so we're now in the sphere of influence of the moon. Gotta set the course adjustment for the periapsis. It's a nice little orbit. I think I'd switch off the SAS. I left it on by accident. Got to be very careful about that. I really don't want to run out of electricity. Okay, let's bring it down. Now I'm going to line up for the adjustment. I'm just going to use the time accelerator to stop moving. Quite low. wait for just the right time to make my burn. Right, so let's throttle up. You can see that curve of the route bending round. Now I've got the orbit. I'm just going to move to be close to the periapsis again. It's shifting. If you burn off the periapsis or the apoapsis, then you're going to shift it off, and it's going to curve your orbit a little bit. So you might have to make adjustments for that. There we go. It's actually quite a bit lower than I was expecting. Let's open our little science bay. Aren't you a sexy little beast? Let's log some temperatures. So even though in the cold vacuum of space, it can try to measure nothing. I'm going to use this maneuver to line me up on the retrograde. Now, where do I land? There's a big crater there. I want to use this to land on something a bit obscure. Something I wouldn't normally land on. Alright, is that a crater there? It's difficult to see on the dark side. Dark side would be perfect for this mission. Later on, I'm going to be using solar panels. This time I'm not, obviously. So I don't need to be doing it in the sun. So if I get the dark side mission done now, I don't have to do it later. So let's explore the dark side of the moon first. Let's do the hard bit. So a bit more. Is that enough? Probably. Right, so I'm lined up. I'm going to use my CS to lock onto course. Don't worry about that maneuver there. It's just used as a marker to tell me timing for the burn. Right, I'm going to use time accelerator to get a little bit further around. I think I'm going to overrun my my target if I don't wait. Okay, you can see I can bring it all the way down. There's obviously no atmosphere on the moon, so you can't use atmospheric braking or anything. So you just have to sit in orbit, burn like this until you run out of all sideways speed. So I'm just pointing towards the horizon and killing off my sideways speed entirely. So when you get to 0, this is just going to look like a straight up, straight down line. Oh, I'm not quite going in the right direction, am I? It's just curving round, you can see. So let's adjust this direction a little bit. So it's going to be over this way. So I'm going to do this adjustment, my final adjustment to my course while I'm doing a slowdown. You're going to use quite a lot of fuel slowing down, unfortunately. So it's a bit of a problem. I haven't got much fuel. I'm nearly all the way to the ground now. So I'm switching to retrograde. Just gonna slow myself down. Ooh, I'm gonna hit the planet if I'm not careful. Am I going in too fast? No, there we go. Slowed it down enough. So slow it down. We're just gonna take it nice and easy for the last stage. So you want to do as few burns as possible while you're coming into land like this. The faster you go in, the more fuel efficient you are. The downside is that if you hit the planet too quickly, you will die, and you can't slow down instantly. So you have to give enough time before you hit the planet to slow down. The problem is that your altitude meter is never going to be quite right. So you have to make a judgment call. Yeah, if you knew the precise height of the surface, and the altitude on the altimeter's wrong, so there's no way around that. Let's slow down a bit more. Looks hopefully reasonably flat around here. Yeah. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Don't fall over. And touchdown. Jebediah has reached the moon. So let's do some lovely science and get it all on board. Log temperatures and everything. Just going to keep it all and take it all home with me. Whoa, that's a bit buggy. He just completely flipped out the moment I opened the hatch. He must have bumped his head on the service module or something. Let's take an EVA. Also going to want to take a sample. But while I'm here, I'm going to check the Space Center again, get some more missions. Hey, there we go, perfect. Plant flag on the moon. Tons and tons of money, zero effort. The perfect mission. Obviously, you could be a bit of a cheating alpaca and leave a guy on the moon. And then you could just repeatedly plant flags whenever that mission comes up. But you would have to leave someone on the vacuum of space for all eternity. There we go, there's our little flag. Kerbal. Then we can write a little message on our little plaque. Excellent. Oh, jump. Get quite high. I'm going to activate our jetpack, pressing R. And we can just press shift to go up to our capsule nice and easily. Grab. And board. Perfect. All aboard. Right. What else have I got to do? I've got to worry about not having enough fuel, I'm telling you that. So I've got to get into orbit. And then I've got to get back to Kerbin orbit. I've got no idea what the maximum possible speed for re-entry is. Obviously I've done re-entries from orbit. From low orbit, that is. But here we're just going to be doing re-entry all the way from the moon. That's going to be travelling a hell of a lot faster. I'm quite worried that that's going to vaporise, trying to do it too quick. Oh god, look at that fuel. Going to really have to be careful with this fuel. It's going to be pretty much optimal, isn't it? Oh dear. Okay, so what we did there was we found that landing is impossible. We haven't got enough fuel. So what we're going to do is not land on the moon. Okay, I've just rolled it all the way back. So this is just before we made our attempt at land on the planet. What we're going to do this time is we're just going to do a orbit then return. It's a bit of a shame. So first attempt to land a man on the moon is a complete failure. Yeah. So, lesson for next time. Get more fuel. Ideally you'd need enough fuel so that you can get all the way out to the moon without having to use any fuel from your lander. That is the real killer there. Yeah, so it was the orbital stage that's the failure, really. Okay. Not that one. So let's try burning from the opposite side. If you burn at different orbital points on the moon, then you're going to get different orbits when you leave. That first one wasn't too bad. See if I can find it again. There we go. So let's do that again without messing it up. So you just want the smallest possible one here. Right. So I'm looking at the amount of fuel we get there and then trying a few alternatives, see if we could do a bit better. Right, so periapsis looks to be completely optimal. So let's do it there. Just try to feather it to get the minimum possible amount of fuel used. Compare it to the one at the other side. So we're getting a worse orbit, and yeah, it's just completely worse, isn't it? Oh, that's nice. But oh, look at that fuel consumption there. That's a lot of fuel. We do get a very low orbit though. No, this is definitely the best. I've tried all the alternatives. Get this right. Swing round until we reach the burn. So we set it to automatically go prograde. Nice, easy burnout. So yeah, failing to reach the moon. Bit of a disaster. So more fuel. More fuel is, of course, the... catchphrase for every stage in the... yeah, okay, under the contract when I reset it and moved it back. Yeah, you always need more fuel. You always need more power and more fuel. That's the real challenge of the game. There we go. So we've left the sphere of influence off for the moon. Now we can do a little bit more science. Oh, yeah, we go. So it's this high space above Kerbin. Let's close that up. And now I'm just going to head back to the planet, and I'm going to try to get a really low orbit so I get a nice slow speed when I go for re-entry. I'm not sure that's really necessary, but it's good practice.